It's a Saturday afternoon in 1958, and a 10-year-old boy is standing at a workbench in the basement, leaning over an open wooden box. Inside the box are rows of small glass bottles, each with a handwritten label, a rack of real glass test tubes, a tiny balance scale, a thick manual, and a small alcohol lamp, which is lit, its flame burning steadily a few inches from his hands. The air smells faintly of sulfur, of struck matches, of something sharp and chemical. He carefully tips one powder into a test tube, holds it over the flame, and a moment later there's a small flash, a puff of colored smoke, a quiet pop, and a grin spreads across his face. His father is standing right there. He does not take the flame away. He shows the boy how to hold the tube, how to point it away from his face, how to respect what he's doing. This is not an accident waiting to happen. This is an education. That boy might grow up to be a chemist, an engineer, a doctor. Millions of boys just like him did. Because there was a time when America put real fire, real acid, and real chemicals into a box, wrapped it up, and gave it to a child for Christmas, and trusted them with it. And then America got scared. This is the story of what we lost when we did. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from.
If you ever had one, the memories aren't visual first. They're in your nose. You remember the smell, the rotten egg tang of sulfur, the bite of something acidic, the burnt match scent that hung in the basement air long after you were done. You remember the look of the thing, the wooden or metal case that opened like a treasure chest, the neat rows of labeled bottles, the glass test tubes you held over the little blue flame of the alcohol lamp. You remember the manual, thick and serious, page after page of experiments, and the thrill of the ones near the back, the ones that made colors change, that made a foul smell, that made a small flash or a tiny bang, the chemical magic. You remember mixing things you maybe weren't supposed to, just to see what would happen. Most of the time, nothing. Sometimes a wonderful little surprise. Once in a while, a singed eyebrow. And you remember that it was real. Real glass that could break. Real flame that could burn. Real chemicals with real warnings. You were doing actual chemistry in your own house, with your own hands. And someone had decided you could be trusted to.
Let's be honest about what these things actually were, because it's the whole point of the story. A mid-century chemistry set was not a safe toy, and it was never pretending to be. It contained real glassware that shattered. It contained an open flame alcohol lamp. It contained genuine chemicals, acids, compounds that could burn your skin, stain a countertop, produce a sharp gas, or make a small, sudden bang. Some of the most elaborate sets came with a glass-blowing attachment and an actual blowtorch, so a kid could learn to bend glass tubing, a real laboratory skill. By any standard a modern parent would apply, it was alarming. And that wasn't a defect, that was the design. The danger was small, supervised, and instructive. You learn that fire is hot, and acid burns, and glass breaks, not from a warning label, but from careful, guided experience. You learn to be careful, to take responsibility for something that could actually hurt you if you were careless. That lesson, it turns out, may have been the most valuable thing in the box. And for 40 years, 2 American companies put that box in millions of homes. Here's the claim, and it's backed by the people who lived it. A staggering number of America's chemists, engineers, doctors, and inventors will tell you their love of science began with a chemistry set in a basement or a garage. The neurologist and author Oliver Sacks credited his own home chemistry experiments as the foundation of his scientific life and argued there is simply no substitute for doing the experiments yourself, thinking them out, taking responsibility, and occasionally facing real risk. There's a telling fact among working chemists. Many rate the battered, stained chemistry set manual of their childhood more fondly than the great founding texts of the field. This toy didn't just entertain a generation, it built one, the generation that would go on to power the post-war scientific boom.
But the deeper story isn't only about the scientists it made. It's about what the chemistry set reveals about a country that has changed beyond recognition, a society that once handed a child a flame and a bottle of acid and trusted them. To understand how that trust was born and how it died, go back to the beginning. The chemistry set has a surprisingly old and theatrical ancestry. Its earliest forerunners were the chemical chests of 18th century England and Germany. Beautiful, expensive, portable laboratories full of glassware and reagents, built so that gentlemen, physicians, and scholars could practice chemistry anywhere. They were serious tools for serious adults. But chemistry had always had a second, more thrilling face: magic. For centuries, natural magic books had taught chemical tricks, making fire, changing colors, conjuring smoke and strange smells that looked like sorcery but were really science. And in the 1800s, as the chemical chests got cheaper, publishers realized something. Children were absolutely desperate to make their own little fireworks, their own disappearing inks, their own color-changing potions. So a flood of cheap handbooks and pamphlets appeared, teaching kids chemical magic. That was the hook: lure children in with the promise of magic, bangs and colors and smells, and they discover along the way that the magic was actually chemistry. It was one of the great educational bait and switches in history. And in early 20th century America, two companies turned it into an industry.
The story of the American chemistry set is really the story of two companies. The first was the Porter Chemical Company, founded in 1914 in Hagerstown, Maryland by two brothers, John and Harold Porter. They started out simply selling packaged chemicals, then had the idea to bundle them into kits for boys. They split the work perfectly. John researched and designed the experiments, and Harold wrote the instruction manuals. They called their kits Chemcraft and built them around chemical magic, and they were a sensation, soon selling in Woolworth stores across the country for as little as $1. The second company belonged to one of the great showman inventors in American history, Alfred Carlton Gilbert. Around 1920, Gilbert, already famous for another beloved building toy, added chemistry sets to his line, and his name became one of the most trusted in American toys. From roughly 1920 all the way to 1960, these two, Chemcraft and Gilbert, utterly dominated. If you own the chemistry set in those 4 decades, there's an excellent chance it came from one of them. And the Gilbert story is worth telling because the man was extraordinary. A.C. Gilbert was not a typical toy maker. He was, frankly, a phenomenon. He put himself through Yale Medical School, partly by performing as a professional magician. He was a world-class athlete who won an Olympic gold medal in the pole vault in 1908. And he was a relentless inventor and businessman whose company gave America 2 of its most iconic toys: the Erector Set, the steel girder building kit that taught countless boys engineering, and later the American Flyer model trains. He earned a permanent place in legend during the First World War. When the government considered banning the production of toys to conserve materials for the war effort, Gilbert reportedly made such a passionate case for the importance of toys to children's development, even bringing toys to a meeting with officials, that the ban was averted. He became known in story as the man who saved Christmas. This was the man behind the chemistry set, a magician, an athlete, an engineer, an evangelist for the idea that the right toy could shape a child's entire future. He believed deeply in handing kids the real thing. To grasp how much America once trusted its kids, just look at what these companies legally sold to children, by mail and at the corner store. A good mid-century set contained dozens of real chemicals in labeled bottles, including acids and reactive compounds that today would never be allowed near a toy. It came with real, breakable glassware, test tubes, beakers, flasks. It came with a working alcohol lamp, an open flame, and a balance for measuring. The more advanced sets included glass-blowing equipment with a small blowtorch, because learning to work glass over a flame was considered a legitimate skill worth teaching a teenager. The manuals were serious documents, often well over 100 pages, laying out experiment after experiment, building from simple color changes toward genuine chemistry. The sets ranged from $1 or $2 for a starter, all the way up to the equivalent of hundreds of dollars today for the deluxe versions. This was sold as a toy, marketed for Christmas, aimed at boys as often as young as 10, with real fire and real acid in the box. And as remarkable as all of that is, none of it compares to what Gilbert put on the market in 1950. In 1950, riding the wave of America's fascination with the atomic age, A.C. Gilbert released what is, without exaggeration, the most astonishing toy ever sold to children: the Gilbert U-238 Atomic Energy Lab. It was a chemistry-style kit about the atom, and it did not use models or pretend. It came with real radioactive material, actual samples of uranium ore. It included a working Geiger counter that clicked in the presence of radiation, an electroscope, a spinthariscope, and the cloud chamber, a device in which a child could watch with their own eyes the tracks of actual subatomic particles streaking through the vapor as radioactive atoms decayed on the kitchen table. Think about that. A company sold children a box containing genuine radioactive sources so they could observe nuclear physics happening live in their own bedrooms. It cost around $50 in 1950, wildly expensive for a toy, and it flopped. It was only made for about a year. But it has become immortal, the legendary symbol of an era when American grown-ups looked at the most powerful force in the universe and thought, yes, let's let the kids have a look. It's almost impossible to imagine now, and the reason it's impossible to imagine is the heart of this story. Why did America do this? Why hand children fire, acid, and uranium? Because for a while, it felt like exactly the right thing to do. Coming out of the Depression and into the post-war boom, parents desperately wanted their kids to have stable, respectable, future-proof careers, and science was the surest path. A chemistry set wasn't reckless, it was ambitious. It was an investment in a child who might become a scientist, an engineer, someone who would make money and make the world better. Then the Cold War poured gasoline on it. After the Soviets launched Sputnik in 1957, America panicked about falling behind in science, and the chemistry set became almost patriotic, a tool to build the army of scientists who would win the future. The danger in the box was the price of raising a capable, curious, fearless child. So, tell everyone in the comments, did you have a Gilbert or a Chemcraft? And what's the first thing you made that you probably shouldn't have? The bang, the smell, the stain on the basement floor? Here's the truth that sat at the center of the whole thing. The truth we'd later forget. The small danger in that box was not a bug. It was the entire point. When a kid held a test tube over a real flame, they learned, physically, permanently, to respect heat. When they handled an acid that could actually burn, they learned care, focus, and consequence. When something went a little wrong and singed an eyebrow, they learned, harmlessly, that actions have results, and that the world is real. The chemistry set taught chemistry, yes, but underneath that, it taught judgment, the ability to handle something genuinely risky responsibly with your own two hands. You cannot teach that with a warning label. You cannot teach it with a non-toxic plastic kit. You can only teach it by trusting the child with something real and standing nearby while they learn to handle it. And that, the trust, the realness, the small accepted risk, is exactly what America was about to decide it could no longer allow. The fear came from several directions at once, and the first was a change of heart about science itself. For decades, chemistry had been a magic word. It meant progress, the future, miracle materials, a better life. But in the 1960s, that image curdled. In 1962, Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring, revealed how pesticides were poisoning the natural world, and it landed like a bombshell.
The thalidomide tragedy, in which a pharmaceutical caused devastating birth defects, horrified the public. Smog choked cities like Los Angeles. And over all of it loomed the mushroom cloud. The same atomic science that had thrilled the nation now threatened to end it, fueling powerful anti-nuclear and environmental movements. Almost overnight, in the minds of parents, the word chemistry flipped from positive to negative, from progress to poison, from the future to the fallout. The very thing the chemistry set celebrated had become something to fear. At the same time, parents grew uneasy with glass and flame and metal in their children's hands. Cheap plastic toys, safer for unsupervised play, began to crowd the shelves. The cultural ground had shifted. And then came the law.
If the cultural fear loaded the gun, regulation and liability pulled the trigger. It came in waves. The Federal Hazardous Substances Labeling Act of 1960 required warnings on toxic and dangerous materials, and chemistry set makers responded by quietly pulling the acids and the alcohol lamps from their kits. The Toy Safety Act of 1969 created the first national safety standards for toys and gave the government power to test and ban them. The Consumer Product Safety Commission, created in 1972, forced the companies to justify their contents to regulators, to answer, item by item, why a child should be allowed to bend glass or produce a gas. The Toxic Substances Control Act of 1976 banned some chemicals outright, restricted others, and even required records of who was buying what. And running alongside the laws were the lawsuits. As one veteran collector and historian put it, there was nothing inherently dangerous about most of the chemicals. It was misuse that caused trouble. But in an increasingly litigious America, all it took was one child, one corked test tube, one accident, and you had a lawsuit. The liability alone was enough to make selling a real chemistry set a terrifying business proposition. The men who had built and defended these companies were gone at the worst possible moment. A.C. Gilbert died in 1961. Harold Porter, the manual writer behind Chemcraft, died in 1963. With the founders gone, there was no one left with the passion or the will to fight for the real chemistry set against the rising tide of fear and regulation. The companies couldn't survive the New World. The A.C. Gilbert Company went out of business in 1967. The Porter Chemical Company held on longer, but finally folded in 1984. And the chemistry set itself was steadily hollowed out. The chemicals were diluted or removed, the acids vanished, the alcohol lamp disappeared. The glorious 100-plus page manuals shrank to 25 or 30 pages of simple, safe, routine experiments. Later fears, over backyard drug labs, over homegrown terrorism, would tighten things further, until even adult hobbyists found it nearly impossible to buy ordinary laboratory chemicals, with suppliers logging every purchase. Piece by piece, bottle by bottle, the real chemistry set was disassembled, not by a single decision, but by 1,000 careful, reasonable, frightened ones. Walk into a toy store today and you can still buy a chemistry set. Open it up and you'll often find no real chemicals at all. You'll find instructions to grow crystals, make slime, blow bubbles, activities labeled non-toxic and environmentally safe, no acids, no open flame, no glass, no bang. The word survived. The thing inside did not. And here's where honesty matters, because this isn't a simple story of villains. Much of what was removed should have been removed. No sane person wants to hand a 10-year-old a vial of cyanide or a chunk of uranium ore. Those things were genuinely dangerous, and taking them out was right. But the pendulum didn't stop at remove the truly deadly. It swung all the way to remove everything real. And in the process, we may have lost something we didn't mean to. One chemist has even argued that our obsession with safety is producing young scientists who don't know how to respect real danger, kids who won't wear goggles in a lab because they've never handled anything that could actually hurt them. We made the box completely safe, and we forgot why it ever mattered. There was a time when America put real fire in a box and gave it to a child.
It put real acid in there, and real glass, and the real flame, and, for one astonishing year, real radioactive ore. It trusted a 10-year-old to light the lamp, to hold the tube, to make the small bang and the colored smoke, to singe an eyebrow and learn from it. It did this on purpose because it believed that a child who could be trusted with something real would grow into an adult who could be trusted with anything. And for a whole generation of scientists and engineers and doctors, it was right. And then we got scared. We got scared of the acid and the flame, and we were right to. We got scared of the uranium, and we were very right to. But we kept getting scared of the lawsuits, of the chemicals, of the word chemistry itself, until we had taken not just the poison out of the box, but the fire, the glass, the reaction, the risk, and finally, the point. We replaced the lab that made scientists with a kit that makes slime, and we called it progress. The danger was never really the lesson's enemy. The danger was the lesson. We forgot that. And somewhere along the way, a country that once handed its children the real, dangerous, magnificent world decided it would rather hand them something safe and plastic and empty. If you ever lit that little flame in the basement, ever made the bang, ever learned to be careful the hard and wonderful way, you remember. Subscribe, because there's another forgotten story already on the workbench.